New lore just dropped. After you watch this, you will never look at this object the same way again. I'm, of course, talking about the elegant, the underappreciated, and the shockingly high stakes wooden pallet. How many times in your life have you stopped to think about one? Probably not many. There's no reason you would. But these pallets are everywhere. They're underneath the goods at certain stores and found in large supply behind most warehouses you've driven right past. They're trusted by a small handful of elite engineers, quote unquote, to support planes during construction and to hold up gas stations facing hard weather. And this is not a conspiracy theory. Anytime your car is taken into the mechanics, well, you guessed it, sitting on top of some old wooden pallets. Lastly, if you need a way to garden or hold up your... Okay. Maybe pallets aren't used for all these things, but the point holds, they are everywhere. And if you go inside a Costco or a Sam's Club, you'll notice all the bulk goods are sitting directly on the pallets. You might spot the odd white one, but almost every pallet in there is blue. So now, take your time to try to guess. Pause the video. Why are they blue? And secondly, how did each store even get them in the first place? Got an answer? Whatever you came up with is probably wrong, including all of the reasons listed here. They are blue partially because of the Second World War, and mostly because blue is visibly distinctive from long distances. It's pretty weird to think of why you would want a wooden pallet to be distinctive from long distances, but the more you learn about them, the more this seems like a totally normal fact by comparison. The answer to the second question is that the stores don't buy them and don't make them. Any blue pallet you've seen before was rented from just one company. This company owns hundreds of millions of them. In fact, the pallet industry itself is worth nearly $100 billion a year. If you look around your room, almost everything there spent part of its life riding on one. Let that sink in. On a wooden pallet, of course. There's enough money in these plain boards that one company guards them like treasure. It hides trackers inside the wood and follows its pallets across the planet, by satellite, by cell tower, and when those fail, by drone, which is why the pallets have to be visibly distinctive from far away. This company even keeps former police officers on staff, full-time employees known as Pallet Detectives, to hunt down the ones that go missing. Because every year, more than 1 million of them are estimated to be stolen from this one company alone, feeding a black market worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And speaking of those stolen pallets, every July, thousands of them inconspicuously end up here, in a small town in Northern Ireland called Larne. People spend 3 months stacking them into a tower over 200 feet tall. 20 stories. Taller than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Quite possibly the biggest stack of wood on the planet. Tall enough, you could probably parachute off the top. Wait, that wasn't a challenge. Oh. Anyways, all in one night, they set the whole thing on fire. And so, the plot thickens. A company that can find one of its pallets on the far side of the world and send real detectives after anyone using them without paying, chooses only to stand back and watch them burn. Again. And again. And again. This is the story of the most important object you've never thought about. The company that came to own hundreds of millions of them completely by accident. And why, once a year, even it has to let them burn. It started with a problem the American military couldn't solve. At the end of the Second World War, the US was running the largest supply operation the world had ever seen. To win the Pacific, it had to move millions of tons of food, fuel, and ammunition across the ocean onto islands with no ports and no roads. And moving all of it, mostly by hand, was a nightmare. The tool already half existed. The pallet had been around since the 1920s, invented alongside the forklift to move a whole stack of cargo at once. But the early ones, they were a mess. A forklift could only slide in from 2 sides, so it had to line up head-on every time. They had no bottom deck, so they were wobbly and hard to stack, and they were heavy. A Navy supply officer named Norman Connors fixed all 3 issues at once. He cut openings on all four sides so a forklift could grab a pallet from any direction. He added a bottom deck so it stacked clean and without wobbles, and he made it light, completely out of wood, and cheap enough to throw away. The payoff was enormous. A boxcar that once took 3 days to unload by hand could be cleared in 4 hours. The humble pallet quietly became the invisible standard underneath the entire war effort. Then the war ended, and the Americans went home. Much of that Pacific supply ran through Australia, where the Americans shipped their pallets in by the boatload, with many of them painted the standard issue military blue. Shipping a mountain of cheap wooden platforms back across the ocean wasn't worth the cost, so they left them behind. For most countries, the small number of pallets left behind was negligible, but the Australian government in particular found itself holding around 60,000 of these pallets it never asked for, plus 1,000 forklifts and cranes. It decided to gather them into a single pool and set up an agency to rent the equipment back out to the businesses. It gave that agency a name only the government could love: the Commonwealth Handling Equipment Pool. Take the first letter of each word and you get the name of the company this whole story has been about. The blue pallet you've walked past without thinking about twice. The one 360 million strong, found in Costco's, Sam's Club, and other stores across the planet. The one sitting beneath your nose this entire time. CHEP. And the story doesn't end there. Under the big letters in smaller print, it says a Brambles company. And Brambles turns out to be an even stranger story in some ways than CHEP is. It's a story that starts with a teenage butcher back in 1875. His name was Walter Bramble. At 18, he opened his shop outside Newcastle, Australia. Every day, he spent hours rowing his meat out to ships in the harbor. It turned out the delivering, not the butchering, was the real business for him. He kept hauling, for other butchers, then farmers, then the giant new steelworks. His company kept expanding until Newcastle wasn't big enough for them, and the very first job that ever took the company beyond its home, the humble beginning of a $20 billion empire, was carting a load of rabbits to a railway siding in the middle of nowhere to a place called Nimitable. So if you're feeling a little stuck in life right now, go deliver some live rabbits to the middle of nowhere, give it about a century, and you'll be worth $20 billion. Over the next few decades, that delivery business grew into one of Australia's biggest hauling firms, under a fittingly blunt motto: keep moving, and that is the only reason it ever wanted CHEP. By 1958, Brambles was after the pools, forklifts, and cranes. The machinery is what drove the deal. The pallets, in the company's own words, were just a side bonus. That quote-unquote bonus became an empire because of one idea: that a pallet can come back. In the 60s and 70s, CHEP established that it wouldn't sell them, it rented them. You ship your goods on a CHEP pallet, it reaches the store, and CHEP collects it, inspects it, repairs it, and sends it out again under someone else's load. The same pallet can earn money for decades. A pile of war junk left over by the US military got repainted a different shade of blue and turned into a machine that prints money for as long as the pallets keep coming back. In the 70s, CHEP went global, and by 1990 it had reached the United States, which became its biggest market by far. Meanwhile, the parent company that started as a teenager's butchery kept buying things that had nothing to do with pallets. Garbage trucks, document storage, armored cars, even nuclear waste. At its peak, Brambles sprawled across nearly 200 companies. Then, one by one, it sold almost all of them off, and the one thing left standing was the pallet pool it had bought as a bonus. Everything Brambles actually set out to buy, it eventually got rid of. The only thing that survived is the one thing it never even really wanted. Today, it is essentially just CHEP pallets. As a pure pallet company, the scale is hard to believe. It runs in around 60 countries, employs nearly 12,000 people, and brings in over $5 billion a year. It owns around 360 million pallets and containers as of 2026, and it still paints every one of them blue, mostly because the blue became their brand. In the industry, they don't just call it CHEP, they call it Big Blue. But its real power was never how many it owns, it's that no one has ever been able to copy how it owns them, and not for lack of trying. A pallet is just wood. I know, groundbreaking stuff. But that means that any lumberyard can make one for 10 to 20 bucks. So why do some major corporations rent them? The catch is, the moment a pallet leaves your building, it becomes a hassle. You ship your goods out to stores across the country and, if you're not careful, you will never see them again. Some will break, and even more will get lost. Chasing down a $20 board 2 states away, or shipping back empty boards, costs even more on top of that. Plus, the general storage means that every shipment quietly leaks money, as well as the fact you have to consistently quality assure your pallets for heavy loads. So many big shippers don't own them. They rent from CHEP. Costco, Sam's, Procter & Gamble all primarily use CHEP because CHEP runs its own trucks, has repair depots across the continent, and picks up and transports the merchandise for free. That pickup network is the part no one can easily copy. Many can build a quote-unquote better pallet. No one can rebuild 30 years of product transport networking, but not for a lack of trying. In 2006, a man named Bob Moore, the former CEO of CHEP, left CHEP to try and beat it by building a better pallet. Plastic, 30% lighter, no nails, waterproof, and with 4 radio chips buried inside, so in theory, you could track every one. He sold it as the pallet that couldn't get lost, and he wasn't shy about it. This, he told the press, is the beginning of the end for wood pallets. Wall Street handed him almost $600 million. He signed Walmart, Costco, and Kraft, and he called it IGPS. And the chips did work. Sometimes. When a lost pallet passed by a scanner, IGPS could find it. But here's the problem hiding in the name. IGPS never stood for Intelligent Global Positioning System, the GPS you and I know. It stood for Intelligent Global Pooling System. Basically, the chips weren't satellite trackable. They only answered when a scanner was within 10 feet of them, and almost nobody downstream had one. The big customers did. The thousands of small warehouses and recyclers these pallets drifted into did not. So most of the time, the second a pallet left the building with scanners, it went dark. Of the 10 million quote-unquote unlosable pallets in circulation, 1.5 million were lost or stolen. That loss broke the loans the whole company was built on, and the lenders came for their money. On the way down, IGPS turned on the man who built it. Weeks into a 4-year deal to run the place, Moore was forced out and fired for cause. He sued them right back. Then, it went bankrupt anyway. A new IGPS still runs today, smaller and quieter, making up some of the rentable pallets that CHEP doesn't own. CHEP, the company Moore quit to kill, still owns about 90% of all rentable pallets in America. One bet everything on a better pallet, the other on the network. IGPS lost 15% of its pallets one time, and it was dead. CHEP loses 10% every single year, and it's still here. So how does a company survive losing 36 million pallets a year? And where do all of them even go? Of CHEP's 360 million pallets, about 90% come back every year. The other 10% don't. A small share, maybe 6 million, wore out after a decade and got scrapped. The rest, around 30 million, are just gone. Whoever lost them pays a fine for about half the cost. The other half, CHEP has to swallow. That runs CHEP anywhere from $300 to $700 million a year, straight off the bottom line. It survives that only because it makes billions. The loss is enormous, but not fatal when compared to earnings. Here's the thing though, most missing pallets aren't stolen, they're just lost, stuck in some warehouse or dumped behind the wrong store. It's usually not crime, but leakage. The black market is the part underneath that, where someone takes them on purpose. And across the whole industry, that runs somewhere between $750 million and $1 billion a year. It mostly works one way. A pallet gets sold to a recycler who doesn't ask questions. Then it's resold as is, or thrown in a grinder and turned into chips. Once a blue one goes through the grinder, the stencil is gone, and so is any proof it was ever CHEP's. And almost no one gets caught, because most people don't care to do recon over a stack of cheap wood. The ones who do get caught usually get caught by accident, or by being a little too obvious. This June, in rural Benton County, Washington, a plant manager watched his own security cameras and saw a man loading pallets onto a pickup. And loading, and loading, and loading. By the time deputies stopped the truck a few minutes down the road, it was buried under so many pallets it looked less like a theft and more like a dare. The driver admitted to the whole thing on the spot. But it scales up. In 2021, a man named Bobby Herrera ran a pallet company outside Tampa and used it as cover. He would drive his own semi onto 2 Florida distribution centers, a Saddle Creek logistics yard in Auburndale and a Walmart center in Winter Haven. He'd hook up the whole trailers already loaded with pallets and roll back out through the gate like he belonged there. Over 3 months, he and his site manager did it 25 times, 25 trailers holding nearly 5,000 pallets each, worth about $900,000 all told, emptied at their own yard. When Polk County detectives sat Herrera down and played him the footage, he watched himself back a loaded trailer out of a Walmart lot and said, quote unquote, "That looks like me." And while there are tons of cases like this, not everything you see carted off is stolen, and that is the trap. Stores sometimes leave white pallets out back for people to take for free. Damaged ones get handed off, and plenty of people collect them for a living. The blue ones always belong to CHEP, but in rare cases even they could be damaged beyond repair or waiting for a pickup. The problem is that many people taking them have no idea there is a difference. To them, a pallet is a pallet, and a pallet looks free. So on a grainy camera, a career thief and a guy who thinks he's cleaning up look exactly the same. Half the people taking pallets seem to think they're free for the taking. A vegetable company posted night footage of a truck loading up its pallets and politely asked for them back, saying, "We have your tag number." Interestingly, the comments were split both ways, with one group saying they probably thought they were free to take, and the other saying the fact they did it during the nighttime without asking is suspicious. The guy who did it was never found, and the pallets were never recovered. And when a business does get a clean shot of someone, that's usually where it ends. In Bakersfield, the police put out stills of a man loading Costco pallets and asked the public to name him. A flyer and a few shares later, and nothing ever came of it. In fact, there are even a few tragic cases where people who weren't stealing got accused of stealing. In 2021, a man named Freddie Nelson was loading discarded pallets from a Lowe's in Portland, which he had permission to do, when a security guard blocked his truck, pepper sprayed him, and shot him dead through the windshield. The guard got life for murder, and a jury later put damages at over $20 million, all of it over a stack of pallets that he had every right to take. So as you can see, it's really hard to determine when someone is or isn't stealing pallets, and trying to go after them sometimes leads to worse consequences than just letting them go. CHEP, however, knows none of its pallets are free to take. Still, no police department is going to put a detective on a stack of cheap wood. So CHEP made a decision. If nobody else was going to chase its pallets, it would chase them itself. Remember Bob Moore, the guy who left to build the pallet that couldn't get lost? Well, before any of that, he was running CHEP in America, and he had the same problem they've had for decades. Pallets were leaking out of the pool by the millions every year and piling up in recycling yards across the country. So he put together a team to go take them back. CHEP called them Asset Retrieval Specialists, or more generally, Pallet Detectives, and it included former cops, off-duty cops, and muscle men. A man named Ricky Mock had a rough encounter with them at first, but eventually got rewarded for it. Mock ran a pallet recycling company in Covington, Virginia, and by the time CHEP came for him, he had over 40,000 blue pallets sitting in his yard. He never denied having them. He bought them in bulk from anyone willing to give them away. What happened next didn't really look like a business dispute you'd normally see. By Mock's account, CHEP hired detectives to sit and stake out his trucks for months just outside his property, and they weren't especially good at it. In his words, he saw the officers coming out of the woods just outside his property. CHEP didn't get enough evidence, so they put a helicopter over his lot and photographed 40,000 of their pallets from the air instead. They walked those pictures into a courtroom. On the stand, CHEP's head of asset management admitted they had a phrase for losing merchandise internally. They said, "Never leave a pallet behind." He added that he would rather destroy one of his own pallets than let someone use it without paying. Mock's argument was simpler. Come get them, just pay me for the years I spent storing your stuff. So CHEP sued him for over $1 million, and the jury listened to all of it and ordered CHEP to pay Mock $584,000 instead. CHEP appealed and got that number erased, but it lost the part that actually mattered. The appeals court ruled that refusing to hand pallets back until you're paid isn't theft, if handing them back for free would just enrich CHEP for nothing. which sent the whole thing back down to settle one question: what's a fair price for a CHEP pallet? Because CHEP didn't want to spend that much money to get their pallets back, they said $1.25 is all they're worth in someone else's hands. The judge, in her words, did not feel so constrained to that number and chose $5. 40,000 pallets at $5 each, and this time CHEP didn't appeal. So both sides sort of won. Mock got paid, but CHEP got what it really needed. It established that legally a blue pallet is CHEP's forever, no matter whose yard it's sitting in. CHEP continues to fight for every single pallet, and not just here. A guy in Spain got 2 years in prison for stealing them, and a guy in France got a suspended sentence for moving 2,500 of them. Arizona even passed a law where buying 5 marked pallets without writing down who sold them to you can cost you 30 grand. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, these days none of CHEP's employees are sitting in the woods staking out CHEP pallets. They instead implant trackers on their pallets from a Silicon Valley arm called BXB Digital. Only 1 in 800 of these pallets have one implanted. So, when CHEP suspects malpractice, they still do reconnaissance from time to time, but mostly they use drone imaging because nothing can stay hidden. Cops, helicopters, trackers, drones, lawsuits, and prison. It works almost everywhere on Earth. And yet, every July, there's one town where none of it seems to work at all. Our grand story ends in a small town of only 18,000 people. Lauren sits about 20 miles up the coast from Belfast. In 1690, the Protestant King William of Orange sailed for Ireland to take the throne off the Catholic King James. As his fleet came up the coastline, people lit fires along the shore to guide the ships in. William won at the Battle of the Boyne. The Protestant line kept the British throne, and ever since, on the night of the 11th of July, Loyalist communities have lit bonfires to celebrate. There are still more than 200 bonfires every year. Some of these are moderate bonfires of branches and twigs, but in a handful of estates it turned into a competition that has gotten out of hand. These committees fundraise for most of the year, hire cranes, and pay professional land surveyors to come and certify the final heights. Craigie Hill, an estate in Larne, has won that fight so completely that its 2024 bonfire was the tallest bonfire ever built. You cannot stack branches 200 feet in the air. You need pallets, thousands of them, and the good ones aren't for sale to anybody. So there is no off-season. People constantly collect pallets for the cause year-round. By January, kids are wheeling shopping trolleys stacked with pallets through the streets in the middle of winter. The gatherers sleep outside just to guard them. Not from the police, and not from CHEP Pallet Detectives, but from each other. A researcher at Queen's spent time with the young men who build these things, and one of them explained, if your bonfire gets burnt down, you assume it was the Catholics. If the pallets get stolen, however, it was another bonfire. CHEP isn't just dealing with one bonfire stealing its goods, but dozens of them. Nobody's taking blue by accident either. When Craigie Hill set the record, one of the builders was asked why and didn't dress it up. The blue and the red ones are stronger, he said. They take a lot more weight and pressure, and that was the key to safely getting the height. In 2024, industry insiders counted the Craigie Hill pyre before it went up. Of the 8,596 pallets, around 3,470 were CHEPs, worth about 77,000 pounds on their own. Another 300 belonged to LPR, the French company that owns the red ones and doesn't sell them. All told, more than 130,000 pounds of other people's property stacked and waiting. It also kills people. In July 2022, the same week Craigie Hill was chasing the record, a window cleaner and a father of 2 named John Steele fell to his death while building a smaller bonfire a few miles away in Anteville. That fire was taken down out of respect, and Steele's family asked the Craigie Hill crew to go for the record anyway, in his memory. Another tragic story is that just 2 weeks ago, a man in his 40s named Warren Little fell from a bonfire in the Braniel estate in East Belfast, and he died in a hospital the same day. His committee spoke with the family and lit it that night after a minute of silence. Also this year in Green Island, a bonfire lit up at midnight and the embers came down on a row of houses. David Haighton is 87 and has lived in his house for 54 years, much longer than the tradition of stacking pallets in larger and larger bonfires. He woke up, saw the gate out back was burning, banged on his neighbor's door, and struggled to get his elderly wife Esther out of bed and out of the house. 13 minutes after the fire was lit, the first emergency call came in. 2 homes burned to the ground and nobody was hurt, which he says is the only thing keeping him going. Everything else is gone: clothes, money, documents, and 54 years worth of memories. His GoFundMe is in the description of this video. He's just another tragic case of these fires with little to no regulations on them. After Steele died in 2022, a coroner asked the local council to hand over its health and safety policies for bonfires. The council's solicitor had to explain that risk assessments aren't something the council carries out. There are no bonfire-specific laws in Northern Ireland, and the ones that already cover the theft and the dumping just don't get enforced. To understand why, you have to understand the community. Last year, a bonfire went up in Belfast, directly beside an electrical substation that powers Belfast City Hospital and the Royal Victoria, on grounds with asbestos in it. The city council voted to have the material removed. The police declared a major incident, looked at all of it, and then announced that they would not help contractors take it down. And again this year, in the same location, the pallets were stacked up, then burned to the ground. If the police won't move a bonfire sitting on asbestos next to the power supply for 2 hospitals, they are not going to dismantle one, just for CHEP's sake. A government report found these fires let paramilitaries extend their legitimacy and control what happens in their own communities, which is a polite way of saying nobody is going to stop them once they're being constructed. To the people building it, they don't think of it as theft. It's tradition and identity, and for some of them, defiance. And that's the one thing CHEP was never built to fight. It's a company that only exists because of what got left behind after the Second World War. It can track pallets on the opposite side of the world, but if no one locally is willing to pursue them, and the police and government won't help the cause, then it can't do anything. This is the story of 2 historic wars with unfinished business, and a wooden pallet sitting in the middle of both. One side desperately trying to protect it, and the other trying to burn it to the ground. Thank you for watching. I have many more deep dives planned, and many of them aren't just about products or companies. If you stayed, please consider subscribing. Any support you can give is huge for the channel. Also consider supporting David Haighton, link in the description.